Today was much anticipated day as Keir Starmer would face the leader of the opposition over Labour, not wanting to carry out a full inquiry over the rape gang cover-up. It's safe to say, we didn't see a confident Keir Starmer. In fact, he was very reserved and didn't have any confidence in what he was saying. In today's video, we will watch and react, whilst also going over all of the latest news from up and down the country. But first, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel and join our fast-growing community. So have a watch of Jess, Phillips and Keir Starmer squirm.
Prime Minister is being very specific because I have raised this issue. I've raised it in speeches, I've raised it publicly. He knows that as a minister, I would not have been speaking on this specific issue. I was not a Home Office minister, but Mr. Speaker, I will remind him about other victims who came to me, who I did help. The victims of the Tavistock scandal, who came to me as a minister. I didn't send them away like his safeguarding minister. I made sure, as his Labour Party were calling me transphobic, that we launched the CAS review, which even his health secretary has accepted. So we do right by victims, Mr. Speaker. The reason why a national inquiry is important is because this issue is systemic. It has been involving local and national officials, the police, prosecutors and politicians. He talks about some of the local inquiries, but these interlinked issues cannot be covered by local inquiries alone. In fact, the leaders of the Manchester inquiry resigned because they couldn't get evidence, they couldn't summon witnesses, and not a single person in a position of authority has been held to account. The Prime Minister called for 9 inquiries in the last Parliament. Does he not see that by resisting this one, people will start to worry about a cover-up?
Mr. Speaker, this is an important issue, and we have to focus on the victims and survivors. And it isn't helpful. This sort of lies and misinformation and slinging of mud doesn't help them one bit. Doesn't help one bit. Mr. Speaker, she raised a question of a victim with me, and quite right to, and I accept that victims and survivors are in different places on this. Those that I've spoken to are worried about the delay of a further inquiry. The last inquiry took 7 years. That would take us to 2031. Now, these inquiries, amongst the issues that's been raised with me, and if she's been speaking to victims, they'll have raised this with her, is that it's very hard for victims and survivors to come forward to explain what's happened to them. They do not want to be rushed through this process, which is why the last one took 7 years. It's not sensible to suggest that this can be done in a hurry, on the cheap and comprehensively. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, that would take us to, let's say, 2030, 2031. The victims that I've spoken to want action today. I agree with them on that. But what I don't understand, I genuinely don't understand, is why anybody today would vote against the Children Wellbeing Bill, which will protect children who are vulnerable today. It will kill the bill. It will stop those provisions for children exposed at risk today. I implore them, vote for the bill. Don't wreck this in this misguided way.
Mr. Speaker, it is very possible to have shorter inquiries, especially if they are covering areas that have not been looked at yet. We don't need to repeat the work that has already been done. Let's look at new areas. Former Labour MP Anne Pryor said that there were councillors and MPs all over the country who knew what was going on but were terrified of being labelled racist. A national inquiry would ask if there was a racial or cultural motivation to some of these crimes where white girls were seen, as Jack Straw said, as easy meat. The member for Rotherham was sacked from Labour's front bench for speaking out about rape gangs. Does the Prime Minister now recognise that sacking people for telling the truth creates a chilling effect that means victims aren't listened to?
Well, I'm very happy to call out anybody who hasn't acted properly in these cases. I've done it many, many times before, and it doesn't matter to me which political party they're in. I'll call them out and I will condemn them. Mr. Speaker, when I was Chief Prosecutor, I took measures to confront this head-on. The first of the the first of the mass prosecutions for an Asian gang was in Rochdale. My team came to see me. It put a number of Asian men in the dock. They wanted the green light for the first of these cases to take place. I gave that green light, but on one condition, because it came to my attention that one of the men that was going into the dock had previously been arrested but not charged. And I said, you can bring the first of these mass prosecutions, but only if you look back at the file where we weren't charged and tell me what went wrong with a report so that I can start to put it right. And that's what started the reforms I brought about. So that's the approach I took in practice, whilst others were tweeting and talking. It's the approach I would take now in any case where there's wrongdoing here. But what we've got to do now, Professor Jay has said this, we have had a number of strong findings. There are 20 on the table from Professor Jay. We've got to get on with action. Don't block it this afternoon.
Mr. Speaker, we need to focus on what this is really about. This is not about the Prime Minister's work in the CPS. And I would say very respectfully to the Prime Minister, it's not about you, it is about the victims. Be a leader, not a lawyer. We know that people were scared to tell the truth because they thought they would be called racist. If we want to stop this from ever happening again, we cannot be afraid. The Labour Party has adopted the APPG definition of Islamophobia. That same APPG report said talking about sex groomers was an example of Islamophobia. This is exactly why people are scared to tell the truth. And the lack of clarity means that innocent British Muslims are smeared by association. That is not fair, and only a national inquiry can solve this. So will the Prime Minister look again at the Labour Party's adoption of the definition of Islamophobia, its chilling effect, and rule out introducing it in government?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I will call out any aspect that has prevented anybody coming forward or any case going forward when it comes to violence against women and girls, child abuse or child sexual exploitation, as I have been doing now for the best part of 15 years. But, yes, some people will say there should be a further inquiry. But that does... I accept that, but that means all the victims and survivors who are going to give evidence need to be in a position to do so. Not all of them are. I've been speaking to them. There are some that do think they are. It will take time. All of the institutions will have to give evidence. That will take time. This will delay things till 2031 also. But Mr. Speaker, we already know what the major flaws are. And my argument is we should get on with that action. And that's why we're bringing forward the bill this afternoon.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has effectively told us that he's not able to do two things at the same time. This issue of a delay is a weak excuse, and I would say to him that by refusing this inquiry, he is enabling those people who wish to smear all British Muslims based on the actions of a small minority. He is talking about distraction tactics. Let us have the truth. The Prime Minister cannot tell the House the full scale of the scandal. He doesn't want questions asked of Labour politicians who may be complicit. He won't listen to the victims. He won't listen to the victims who are calling for a national inquiry. He is making this all about a bill this afternoon. Later today, he will tell Labour MPs, including in Telford, Rochdale, Bristol, Derby, Aylesbury, Oldham, Bradford, Peterborough, Coventry, Middlesbrough, Newcastle, Ramsgate, to tell all of these people to vote against a national inquiry into the gangs which have systematically gang-raped children in their constituencies. This is one of the worst scandals in British history, Mr. Speaker.
Sorry? This is a very, very important issue that does matter to the country. It matters to all our constituents. I want to make sure they can hear what's being said by the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of the worst scandals in recent British history. But how are they going to explain to their constituents that obeying his whip is more important than doing the right thing.
She's right to say it's one of the worst scandals. It's terrible. That's why I acted on it. If her recently acquired view that it's a scandal, having spent a lot of time on social media over Christmas, not once in 8 years did she stand here and say what she's just said. Not once in 8 years. They didn't act on the recommendations. They want a national inquiry. We had a national inquiry, the J inquiry, the J report. 20 recommendations, not a single one implemented. Not a single one implemented. And she said you can do two things at once. You can't kill the bill this afternoon, wreck that bill, and protect children. There was Mr. Speaker, there was a dreadful case of Sarah Sharif that everybody will remember. This was the girl taken out of school and abused by an abuser. The bill this afternoon fixes that gap. And I know, I'm looking across, I know there are honourable members on the benches opposite who know very well that what's in this bill is necessary, that it's the right thing to do, and that would want to vote for this bill. I urge them to think twice about following this short-sighted, misguided, bandwagon-jumping approach of the non-leadership of the Leader of the Opposition. I urge them to.
What are your thoughts on this and who is in the right? Let me know in the comments. In other news, economists have warned that Rachel Reeves is close to breaking her fiscal rules, which could lead to more tax increases, as borrowing costs reach their highest point since 1998. The Chancellor only has £1 billion left in her budget before she faces a tough choice: raising taxes, cutting spending, or breaking her main rule of balancing the budget by the end of this Parliament. Capital Economics has revealed the rise in borrowing costs has almost completely used up the Chancellor's financial cushion, wiping out £8.9 billion of her £9.9 billion headroom. Economists Ruth Gregory and Alex Kerr said, "There is a significant chance that the Office for Budget Responsibility, OBR, will judge that the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is on course to miss her main fiscal rule when it revises its forecasts on March 26th. The analysts noted that fiscal headroom has never been this low in recent years. They cautioned that just a 0.06 percentage point increase in market interest rates would completely eliminate the remaining headroom. They added, it would only take a further 0.06 percentage point increase in market interest rate expectations and 20-year gilt yields to wipe it out altogether. Capital Economics said that this is before the OBR factors in the recent weakness in economic activity. It said, Reeves will be in trouble if the OBR decides that some of the weak GDP growth in Q3 and Q4 of last year reflects a permanent, rather than a temporary, loss of output. It would take just a 0.1% downward revision to the OBR's forecast in 2029-30 to wipe out that £1.0 billion of headroom. This means Reeves could soon face a nasty choice of breaking her fiscal rules or announcing more tax rises and/or spending restraint at a time when the economy is already weak. We suspect she would choose the latter, perhaps by reducing spending relative to existing plans in 2028/29 and 2029/30. That way, she could avoid worsening the economy's near-term prospects and avoid politically unpalatable tax rises. And she may hope that by the time the spending squeeze arrived, things had improved such that she would not actually have to implement it. Market analysts have also raised concerns about stagflation, as inflation remains persistent while growth stalls. Sunaina Sinha Haldea of Raymond James told the BBC that markets view this situation very poorly as it limits the Bank of England's options. She said, "There's no impetus to spur the economy into a growth mode, and markets are concerned that will absolutely cost the UK in terms of its economic outlook. The mood music around the UK is different this time around. Certainly this time around the concern is more dire and the mood is darker. The Bank of England is now expected to cut rates only twice, in 2025, compared to earlier expectations of 6 reductions. A Treasury spokesman responded to the fiscal pressure, stating, No one should be under any doubt of the Chancellor's commitment to economic stability and sound public finances. That is why meeting the fiscal rules is non-negotiable. The spokesman emphasised that Reeves would not repeat the likes of October budget and is now focused on rooting out waste in public spending through the spending review and growing the economy. The UK's long-term government borrowing costs have surged to their highest level since 1998, dealing a potentially significant blow to Chancellor Rachel Reeves's fiscal plans. The yield on 30-year gilts climbed to 5.22% on Tuesday, surpassing last year's peak and intensifying pressure on the Treasury. The sharp increase threatens to squeeze the government's headroom for public spending as interest costs rise. The pressure on the Treasury's purse strings also impacted the housing market, with Halifax reporting the first drop in average house prices in 9 months during December. Mortgage rates have risen to an average of 5.47% for a 2-year fixed deal, further challenging home affordability. What are your thoughts on what we discussed in today's video? Let me know down in the comment section below. If you've not yet already, make sure you do drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel for more British content. Thank you. Take care. Goodbye.